In recent days, the world has witnessed a dangerous escalation that many experts now describe as the most volatile crisis in decades, a standoff that could redefine global power balances and drag entire nations into conflict. Relations between Venezuela and the United States, already on a knife's edge, are now spiraling toward a point of no return. According to the Associated Press, the spark was lit when Donald Trump, speaking to a roaring crowd at a rally in Texas, announced the expansion of the U.S. military presence off Venezuela's coast, framing it as a necessary step to protect American interests in the region. What might have seemed like another bold declaration soon turned into reality when satellite images published by Naval News confirmed the arrival of a full U.S. strike group in the Caribbean, led by the massive aircraft carrier USS George Washington, flanked by destroyers and support vessels. The response in Caracas was immediate and furious. Nicolás Maduro denounced the U.S. deployment as nothing less than a declaration of a hunt, an open attempt at regime change, and even the physical elimination of a sovereign leader. State television broadcast his fiery speech live as tens of thousands of Venezuelans flooded the streets of Caracas, waving flags, chanting slogans, and carrying banners that read, "No to US invasion." The capital turned into a sea of resistance, where Maduro vowed before his people that Venezuela would fight to the last bullet in defense of its independence. But the crisis took an even more dramatic turn when a new and unexpected player entered the battlefield, China. As the Financial Times revealed, Beijing issued an official statement announcing that dozens of Chinese naval vessels were being dispatched across the Pacific and Atlantic, under the pretext of joint drills and trade protection. Yet sources within China, cited by the South China Morning Post, admitted that this was no symbolic gesture. It was a direct military signal, a declaration that Beijing stood ready to defend Venezuela. One senior Chinese official, speaking under strict anonymity, delivered a message that reverberated across world capitals. China will not allow investments worth tens of billions of dollars to be threatened by a change of political regime in Caracas. These words were not hollow. Over the past decade, China has poured more than $70 billion into Venezuela, financing oil and gas projects, building massive infrastructure, and embedding Chinese technology into Venezuelan communications. This was not just financial aid, it was a long-term strategy to anchor China's influence in Latin America. And now, for the first time, Beijing seemed willing to risk open confrontation with Washington to protect that investment. In Caracas, this support was embraced with triumph. At a carefully staged press conference, Maduro, holding the latest Huawei smartphone as a symbolic gesture, thanked China in front of the cameras, calling it our brother, our strategic ally, with whom we will build the future. The broadcast was immediately relayed by China's state television CCTV, portraying the image of an unbreakable alliance and presenting the U.S. as an aggressor bent on domination. What appeared to some as propaganda was, as analysts at the Washington Post noted, a carefully calculated military-political strategy designed to tie Venezuela's survival directly to Beijing's rising global ambitions. Meanwhile, alarm bells rang in Washington. Pentagon officials briefed reporters that American ships had already begun operations to intercept Venezuelan vessels, accusing them of transporting drugs and weapons. But privately, the fear was not about Venezuela, it was about China. Behind closed doors, strategists debated whether the U.S. would truly risk a direct clash if Chinese destroyers moved to shield Venezuelan waters. The Wall Street Journal, citing sources within the National Security Council, revealed that Trump had privately floated the idea of a limited naval blockade to cut off Venezuela, but his advisors warned him in stark terms. If even one Chinese warship were sunk or damaged, the repercussions could be catastrophic, sparking a wider war that neither side could control. The significance of China's move cannot be overstated. For the first time in modern history, Beijing appeared ready to challenge Washington not merely to defend its own borders or trade routes, but to protect an ally half a world away in the Western Hemisphere, the traditional stronghold of U.S. influence. Experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies argued that this represented a turning point in China's grand strategy, a shift from regional defense to global expansion, with Venezuela chosen as the proving ground because of its vast oil reserves and its location at the very doorstep of the United States. On the ground, the propaganda war intensified. Venezuelan state media broadcast footage of Chinese warships departing from Hainan, accompanied by patriotic music and fiery commentary about brotherly solidarity. Across Caracas, posters appeared showing the Venezuelan and Chinese flags intertwined, with slogans declaring a new world order free of American dominance. Cuba's Grandma newspaper praised the developments as the dawn of a new era of multilateralism, echoing the sentiment that Washington's uncontested supremacy in the Western Hemisphere may now be under siege. The world watches as this drama unfolds. A clash of superpowers, a battle over oil, sovereignty, and influence, with Venezuela at the epicenter. What began as a local standoff now threatens to erupt into a confrontation that could reshape the 21st century order, testing whether the United States will hold its dominance or whether China will seize its chance to prove it can stand as a true global rival. The Venezuelan crisis has erupted into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino stood before the press and declared with confidence that Venezuela's joint military exercises with China would stand as a guarantee of peace and security. But far from calming the region, his words ignited waves of fear and anxiety across Latin America. Colombia and Brazil, America's closest allies on the continent, immediately sounded the alarm. The Colombian president, in a blunt interview with Reuters, warned, "If Chinese ships enter the Caribbean, the balance of power will change forever." In Brazil, reports from Folha de São Paulo revealed that urgent talks are underway about opening military bases for U.S. aircraft, an extraordinary step that would mark Brazil's deepest military alignment with Washington in decades. What began as an isolated quarrel between Washington and Caracas is no longer bilateral. It has become a regional storm, threatening to engulf all of Latin America in a struggle between superpowers. At the very same time, Donald Trump has seized upon Venezuela as a centerpiece of his fiery election campaign. His speeches are filled with thunderous declarations and defiant vows. "We will not allow China to interfere in our region. Venezuela will be free." Yet behind this bravado lies an excruciating dilemma. Should the United States confront China head-on, risking an escalation that could spiral far beyond the Caribbean? Or should Washington hold back, knowing restraint could shatter the credibility of American power in its own hemisphere? Analysts at Bloomberg warn that this crisis is not just another foreign policy flare-up, it could be the decisive turning point of our century. If Beijing openly defends Caracas, it would shatter the Monroe Doctrine, a foundation of U.S. dominance in Latin America since the 19th century. If, however, Washington crushes resistance, it would send a thunderous signal across the globe. The United States remains the unchallenged master of the Western Hemisphere. Events are unfolding at breakneck speed. Within weeks, joint Chinese-Venezuelan naval drills are scheduled, with Nikkei Asia describing them as a dress rehearsal for coordinated combat operations in a crisis. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has placed its Caribbean strongholds on high alert. Bases in Puerto Rico and Miami are bracing for potential confrontation. And above the region, the unmistakable roar of B-52 bombers has already been heard, slicing across the skies in a deliberate show of strength. The world watches in silence, holding its breath as Venezuela, long dismissed as a troubled but peripheral state, suddenly becomes the epicenter of a global power clash. And looming over everything is the unanswered haunting question: will the United States truly go all the way if China steps in? Inside NATO, the crisis has triggered fierce divisions. According to Politico, the corridors of Brussels are filled with tense, late-night debates, yet no consensus has been reached. Britain and Poland have thrown their full weight behind Washington, demanding that the alliance present a united front against Beijing. But Germany and France are resisting. A senior German foreign ministry official was quoted as saying, "Fighting China over Venezuela would be madness." Paris has gone further, proposing a special diplomatic mission to mediate between Washington and Beijing before conflict spirals out of control. This transatlantic discord reveals just how destabilizing the Venezuelan crisis has become, tearing at the fabric of NATO itself. In Latin America, the divide is even sharper. El País reports that Cuba and Nicaragua have openly offered to provide Venezuela with bases and infrastructure for joint defensive operations with China, cementing a new anti-US axis in the hemisphere. By contrast, Peru and Chile are alarmed. Their leaders fear that the sight of Chinese warships in the Caribbean could trigger the militarization of the entire continent, unleashing an arms race that would destabilize South America for generations. Across capitals, from Havana to Santiago, leaders whisper the same chilling thought. What if this crisis is only the beginning of something far? The economic tremors are already being felt. Global markets have reacted with panic. Bloomberg notes that investors are rapidly pricing in the risk of a large-scale war that could paralyze oil shipments from Venezuela's ports and send shockwaves through the global energy system. The latest issue of Foreign Affairs sounds an even darker warning. We are witnessing the beginning of a new Cold War, but with its first hotspot in the Western Hemisphere. Commentators everywhere are drawing historical parallels. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, they say, is repeating itself, but this time the pieces on the chessboard are different. Instead of Soviet missiles, there is the rising naval power of China. Instead of Cuba, the flashpoint is Venezuela. The parallels are chilling, and the stakes are unimaginably higher. In Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and every major capital, one question dominates conversations. Is this a temporary crisis, or the spark that will ignite a global war? No answer has yet emerged. But one grim certainty overshadows all else. Humanity has entered a new, perilous chapter. Every decision, every move carries the weight of history. One miscalculation could plunge the world into catastrophe. This is not simply about Venezuela, nor even about Latin America. This is about the balance of power in the 21st century, about the struggle to define who leads and who follows in a new world order. The shadow of history looms large, but the danger of today may eclipse anything the world has ever faced. The globe stands on edge, watching as the Caribbean transforms into the stage for a confrontation that could decide the future of humanity.